Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with you. And I want to remind you, as always, this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes. It does not constitute working with a licensed professional. Please seek that out in your area. Now, as you're hearing this, we're going to be wrapping up the month of February, which of course is Black History Month. And if you've tuned in over the last few, now it's going on third year, you know that for this month, we try to celebrate Black pride, Black history, and just Black excellence. And so wrapping up this month, we have a returning guest, and that is Jubi Arriola-Headley, is a Black poet or Black queer poet, storyteller, and author of the poetry collection Original Kink from Sibling Rival Press, a recipient of the 2021 Houstonic Book Award. He's a 2018 PEN, that's PEN, American Emerging Voices Fellow, and holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Miami, and has received support for his work with Yaddo. Yes, Yaddo. Thank you. Malevolent Arts, the Fine Arts Work Center, the Palm Beach Poetry Festival, the Lambda Literature, and the Atlantic Center for the Arts. Jubi and his poetry have been featured in Literary Hub, the Rumpus, the Bellato Poetry Journal, the Nimrod, Southern Humanities Review, Washington Square Review, PBS's News Hours, Briefs but Spectacular, and elsewhere. Jubi lives with his husband in South Florida on Tequesta and Seminole lands, and his work explores themes of masculinity, vulnerability, rage, and tenderness and joy. And he has just come out this February with a new book called Bound. And we're here today to talk more about this new piece of work. But of course, before we get in that, and if those of you have not heard our previous interview, which came out actually for queer months back in June, I think it was 2021.
Wow, time has flown.
Yeah. Well, and this is 3 years of doing this going the third year of doing this podcast.
Right.
Why don't we have a little introduction of how did you get here for those who didn't hear the first one, and hopefully we'll go back and listen to that one.
Right. Thank you, Perry, for having me here today. First of all, I was just telling you before this about how busy I am, and we were talking about how busy you are in the world. But one thing I always have time for is conversations about my work, but about life more broadly. So I'm just happy to be here. As for how I started on the path of poetry, it's a bit odd, I think, but there's a million stories, so I'll just tell you mine. I did some writing in college, and I don't think it was bad, and I got some early support or affirmation for the work I did. And that abruptly ended for me personally when I submitted my work for a competitive senior seminar in English that was focused on creative writing. I was not selected for that. And because I suppose I didn't have affirmation outside of college and not that much within college for pursuing a writing career, I chose to believe that my not being selected for that competitive workshop meant that I probably wasn't as good a writer as I had hoped I might be. So I didn't try to write again really for 20 odd years, although I never really let go of the desire. I tamped it down and tried to keep it at bay. But sometime in the early 2010s, I woke up with this desire to write a book about my father. And we didn't have the best relationship. And I think I wanted to work some stuff out through the writing of that. And I tried initially in nonfiction. And it was not bad because I'm not a bad writer in any genre, but it didn't sing. It didn't have the spark I wanted it to have. And I knew that. And somebody I know suggested I take a poetry workshop. And I thought, that's the most ridiculous idea. I don't know anything about poetry. Why would I
Mm-hmm.
take a poetry workshop? And they kept insisting, kept insisting, kept insisting. And then I said, fine, I will take a poetry workshop because honestly, I didn't have any better ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't getting where I wanted to be with nonfiction. And so I took a poetry workshop and fell in love,
Mm-hmm.
which was shocking to me. I thought I was one of those people who, quote unquote, didn't get poetry, but it immediately drew me in. And so I spent thousands of dollars, ran up credit card bills, taking workshops here, there, and everywhere, online, in person, different places around the country, writing poetry, learning more about poetry. I read every piece of poetry I could get my hands on, and I wrote poetry. And I am sure the first two or 300 poems I wrote were trash, but I am lucky that the people I shared them with didn't say, these are trash, please stop. They said, this is so wonderful that you found this passion, keep going. And so
Mm-hmm.
I kept going. And I transitioned, and I think this is something a lot of writers go through. I think when we start writing, what we do is we imitate what we think is good, what we like, what we identify as moving us. And I was able at some point to transition from copying other writers to mimicking their form or their topics, but putting the Jubi stamp on it. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of my writing is born of me saying, okay, this topic is interesting. How do I make that queer? Or how do I make that black? Or just simply, how do I make that Jubier? So that's kind of my long-winded story of how I came to poetry. And, I'm just blessed to be where I am today. I thought after the first book, if I never write something else, I've accomplished this. And then the second book came and it was stunning to me. I did not expect it at all. So I just feel blessed.
So we'll talk about the second book in a second, but what comes to mind,
Right.
and I think I said this last time, was also how much we're carrying all the wounds from the poetry we had to read in high
Right.
school. And even then, was that really good poetry for us to be able to understand
Right.
what poetry means as opposed to what it
Right.
could be and what we could be through the use of
Right.
poetry?
Right. I'm lucky. I was exposed to some African American poets from the Black Arts movement, which would have been the
Mhm.
60s. Now I went to college in the 80s, so they weren't
Mhm.
even contemporary then. But when I was in high school, and most of college, quite honestly, because I didn't get taught poets in class that were Black poets. That sort of was the Black student union bringing poets to class. I dealt with that same thing a lot of us deal with, which is that canon of poets that have long been dead or that have very little to do with my experience or that I found out later were actively subverting my experience. Um, Wallace Stevens, famous poet, also a famously racist person. Walt Whitman, a queer poet, didn't have a lot to say about Black people in the time he was on Earth, which included the time of slavery. Keats, Yeats, Whitman, E. Cummings, Shakespeare before,
Mhm.
Lord Byron. They're just a whole bunch of dead white men that we were taught were the icons of poetry, were definitive of what poetry should be. So later, when I came across people like Gwendolyn Brooks and Lucille Clifton and Amiri Baraka and later poets even, and I discovered that I can write poetry in a voice that is familiar to me and legitimately call it poetry. It was a stunning thing. I had this experience in workshop, one of the early workshops when I think that was a definitive moment for me where I was talking to another woman who's a friend of mine, actually, still, but we had just met each other and we were in workshop and I was sharing a poem. And she said to me, a young Latinx woman, she said, "What are you trying to do with this poem?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing a poem called America. And I'm trying to sort of do in my America poem what Allen Ginsberg did in his. Now, Allen Ginsberg was a queer poet from the 60s. Sure. Interesting poem that he wrote. But she said to me, why are you writing Allen Ginsberg's poem? What's Jubi's America poem supposed to be?
Mm-hmm.
And as obvious as that is, it was the first time I really thought, oh, oh, yeah, I should be writing in my voice. What are you doing? I don't need to write for Allen Ginsberg. He's long gone. I need to write for Jubi. And it's one of the valuable lessons I've learned over my writing career is that the more specific you are about your life, the more likely you are to connect with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are just people out there who are sharing your grief and your heartache and also your joy and your passion. And you don't reach them by trying to write the most generic poem possible. Nobody needs that. What they need is to hear you and connect with the parts of you they can or don't connect. And we have to be okay with that. I'm not writing to everybody. I'm not trying to write to everybody. I'm writing to some hypothetical person who needs to hear from Jubi.
Mm-hmm.
And they are probably Black. They are probably queer. They might be a woman, but I'm writing to that person. I'm not writing to the world. I'm writing to who needs what I write.
So then, who are you writing to with Bound?
Well, the other person I write to, other than my hypothetical self, and I'm one of the reasons I'm so busy this semester, but this is a joy, is I'm teaching a graduate poetry workshop in the program where I went at University of Miami, and it's been wonderful so far. But we've been having a conversation because one of their other professors told them they needed to be thinking about audience, and I told them that needed to be clarified, and that when you are in the midst of writing, you should not at all be thinking about audience. Your audience is you. You need to figure out what you need to say for you. And after you write it, you can figure out maybe who it'll resonate with. Mm-hmm. But we're not editing ourselves for an audience. We're writing our truth and hoping, praying, being confident even that truth will connect with somebody. So I really feel like when I write, I'm writing towards Black queer folks. And sometimes more enlightened queer folks can be a part of that. Sometimes more enlightened Black folks who aren't queer can be a part of that. But I very specifically know that I'm writing to Black queer folks most of the time. I write in a specific voice that I think sort of very easily code switches from very formal and almost academic to round the way on the corner, in the club or in the bodega. And I love doing that because that's sort of how I live my life also. That's how I speak in the world. So it works well for my poetry, but that's what I'm writing to. People like me, because I always feel like part of what my project is to write us into the world in ways we haven't been given space to be in the world before. So do we get to express our rage? Hopefully. But do we also get to imagine love and joy and pleasure and sex and sensation in ways that for a lot of people, they think that's a blasphemy? We absolutely do. So this new book has, a lot of sexy, grown and sexy poems, a lot of silly poems, a lot of funny poems, but also the very political rage poem. Actually, I think all of my work is political. I think trying to manifest a world where you can be your sexy, leathery, kinky, queer, Black self is already a political statement because so much of the world doesn't want that to even exist. So, yeah.
Very much so. Believe me, haiku on appropriation is an amusing one.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes. I was very pleased with myself the day I came up with that because sometimes my favorite thing is to say a lot in a few words. And for your listeners, I'll go ahead and just recite it because it's very short, so it'll be over quickly. It's called Haiku on Appropriation. And the words are, the only white folk who may enter Black heaven is Tina Marie. And I love that because I think a lot about what it means I think a lot of us who are not white think a lot more than white people do about what it means to be an ally, a true ally, a meaningful, supportive ally, a down in the dirt ally, a doesn't run when it gets hard ally. And I think a lot about how people appropriate our art. There's another poem in the book called Banjo that was born of the fact that, I was way older than I ought to have been when I learned that the banjo was born in Africa. Because in this country, and in this moment, Black folks are releasing country music and being told that we don't have a right to claim it, when really it was born of our voices and our instruments. So it's a fascinating discussion to me. But I think a lot about that. And so I think about who does it feel like isn't appropriating our stuff, who meaningfully loves it and is a student of it. And that music is really what brings them joy and manifests in their soul and sort of just is the light of their life. And I thought about a lot of artists who are not Black, who operate sort of in the R&B, jazz, in general space. And when I think of people who I feel like loved what they did and were intentional about living it, I think of Tina Marie. So that's where that poem was born from. I don't think there are a lot more I could point to that I wouldn't say sort of, like, I can't tell you that I think Justin Timberlake isn't appropriating. I'm never going to say that because I feel like he might be. But also, I've never forgiven him for Janet. So fuck it. I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm supposed to be able to swear on your podcast, so maybe delete that. But yeah. Okay.
Given the fact that we've had other topics about queerdom and kink, we do have an explicit tag. And there's a certain truth to that. And I'll admit that, there's some aspect of, there's some poems in here we're not reading on the air. But, I think there's that aspect of that, being able to speak to that real sense of that visceral feeling. And we never want to shy away from that when we're doing therapy. And it's also one of the things that we sort of can inherently see to what you're saying about those who love it and those who appropriate it.
Exactly. And it just started to feel really obvious. Like, okay, who is walking the walk, talking the talk, living the life, and who sees an opportunity to make some money and gain some notoriety? And I feel like those are very different people with very different experiences. And so I have room for one of those sets of folks, and the other, I don't so much, because I feel like what I am to you is an opportunity, then you're not really vested in my mission in life, which is to create that space where I can live the way I want to and be safe and happy and healthy and thrive, because that's the goal, right? So maybe I've been writing a lot of nonfiction recently, and I'm not ready to share that yet, but it's been illuminating in a way I didn't expect it to be. And one of the things that came up, and I will come back when that book's out, God willing, and talk to you about this. But one of the things that just started coming up for me in this way specifically is I've been thinking a lot about how much, and this is not new, it's not brilliant, other people said it, but I've been thinking personally about how much Black bodies are under surveillance and how much my body is under surveillance. But more than that, how much throughout life I have literally contorted myself to make other people comfortable. One of the poems in my first book, it was born of an experience where I was walking down the street, and behind me, I just heard like sirens and then the whoosh of a police car doing like 90 miles per hour passing me, because, they were on their way to make a caller. Who knows what kind of caller? Hopefully nobody was hurt. But I literally stopped and stiffened when that car passed. I just stood still for like 5 seconds, and then it was gone, and I kept going. There was a white woman, though, maybe 50 feet in front of me, who was on the phone, who was unaffected. She just kept walking, and maybe the most that happened to her was the siren drowned her out, and she was annoyed. But literally, her movement, she didn't lose a step, she didn't falter, she didn't jump. And So I've been thinking a lot about the ways in which Black folks, maybe queer folks too, probably
Mm-hmm.
especially trans and disabled folks, a lot of folks who live in the world who are not white, who are not cisgender, who are not heterosexual, have to sort of limit themselves literally physically so that they don't take up too much space, so that they lean out of the way when other people are passing, because to be in the way is a problem,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it
Yeah,
resonates for a lot of people. Not
right,
that some wouldn't actually want us to hear us sit and discuss it. And
right,
it also, again, it comes back to the difference between those who appropriate and those who actually love us.
right. Exactly, exactly. That is very true. So what I try to do in my writing is give myself and therefore the reader a vehicle to express these things, but also an opportunity to imagine past these things, the world
Mm-hmm.
where I can be as free as I want to be, the world where we can love the way we want to with abandon,
Mm-hmm.
the world where we can be silly and sexy and kinky
Mm-hmm.
and not have people try to curtail that. And I live in Florida, so literally every day the state government is trying to erase who I am. And not that doesn't happen in other places, but
Mm-hmm.
Florida is a particularly prime example at this particular moment.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, working against that constant.
Well, especially since, and again, not to get, there is a certain degree of politicalness into it, that they're trying
Right,
to wipe away multiple parts of our intersectional identity.
right, exactly. Um, there's the Don't Say Gay bill. There is the eradication of critical race theory that has gone farther in eradicating critical race theory because, first of all, I am a proponent of critical race theory, but that's not all of Black history. But
Mm-hmm.
even allowing space for Black history as we understand it, we've got presidential candidates who cannot articulate, will not articulate that the Civil War was about slavery. They are
Mm-hmm.
literally rewriting history in ways that erase our struggles.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like you said, intersectionally, whether that's across gender or sexuality or ethnicity, they're trying to write a story that sanitizes all the trauma that they inflicted upon us. But at the same time, makes it so that we either assimilate or disappear.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch. I used to be angrier about it than I am, but now I kind of feel, and maybe it's the writing part. Maybe the writing part gives me the outside seat. Now I kind of just feel like I'm an observer, well, almost as if I'm a sociologist, just watching the dynamics play out and trying to identify them and point them out to people. That I do that through poetry. Other people do it through other mechanisms, but it really feels like right this second. And historically, this has been important, but I'm having a different understanding of how important it is to use art as a vehicle. Because when they're erasing history, where else are we going to document it? We're going to document it in our writing and on film, and maybe even in our dance and our visual art, because that's what art can do. It can preserve the stories that otherwise would be not only missed, but maybe literally erased, intentionally erased. That's what we're fighting against all the time.
Which brings me to immediately to one of the poems you wrote for Bound, which is Ways to Spot an Invasive Species.
Well, that was a fun one for me. Um, yeah, if I were more prepared, would literally have the book in front of me. It's not far away. Um, if you want me to read it, I could read it, but I can also just talk about it, whichever you think makes more
Or
sense.
I'll read it and we can talk about it. And then after that, we'll take a break. How's that sound?
Sure, that sounds
All
wonderful.
right.
I love it when people read my poems, so thank you.
All right. So, ways to spot an invasive species. Challenge it to a word association game. Say goat, and if it counters with cheese, instead of curry, you might have an overgrowth. Say banana or bay, write quick and wait for leaf or silence to follow. Say ferment, and if it first thought is not kimchi or pig's feet, but craft beer, make sure you pull that peckish weed out by its root. Ask where you can get the best local roti, mufang empanadas. If you don't know the answer yourself, might be you who's out of the place. It must be said, though, these weeds grow from seeds that float on the winds of the whisper campaigns. They'll do what they must to resist being pulled. So try never to munch on your chicharrones while bird watching in a park. Wash the curry stains from your fingers before you fall asleep around an ivy. Don't permit anything within 200 clicks of a pistol. When you go jogging for the love of a return trip, mind you don't slip through the cracks. Mind you don't barrel into a cracker. Mind your manners. Mind your mouth. Mind your melanin.
Yep.
So
I wrote that poem. I love all the wordplay in it. First of all, barrel into a cracker brings up ideas of cracker barrel, but also there are very specific references in there. I don't remember who it was by name, but when I say mind you don't fall asleep around an ivy, it's because at Yale there was a young woman, and this may have happened more than once in an Ivy League school. But I remember a story from a few years ago when a young woman fell asleep in the common room at Yale, and security asked her to leave. Like, it did not occur to them she was a student first. But the mind you don't barrel into a cracker is about a Arbery. Literally having, running into, figuratively speaking, those crackers who then murdered him.
And who were surveilling him.
And who were surveilling him. We are under surveillance so constantly. I mean, I think back to the first person who registers with me in this way. And it's Trayvon, which happened not too far from where I'm sitting right now in Southern Florida. Literally, some random, mediocre, racist white person thought that they had a right to surveil him. And so they did, and perceived he was a threat and therefore murdered him. So we just, and his great sin, Trayvon's, was that he refused to shrink to the size of this man's surveillance of him, to the idea of what this man thought he should be. He did not defer. He dared to be himself, and now he's not with us because somebody thinks they have a right to dictate how big we get to be in the world.
He didn't lean away.
So that's right.
And that's always hard to process, that somebody would want that, and that there are people who, even within our own communities, who are more than willing to then shun others for not being willing to lean away.
Yeah, makes sense.
So we're going to let that sink in for a bit, folks. And we'll be back shortly to continue our talk about Bound by Jubi Arriola-Headley here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, and we'll be back soon.
Follow Voice America at facebook.com/Voice America for juicy updates from your favorite radio shows and podcasts.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Tune in to the Voice America Variety channel on the Voice America Talk Radio Network. Voice America Variety broadcasts a diverse array of topics reaching a global community. Our experts come from all walks of life, and the topics they discuss are everything from current events, arts and entertainment, leadership, parenting, relationships, self-improvement, career advice, and a variety of other topics. Check us out today. You're sure to find something of interest. Voice America Variety. Talk on today's hot topics.
We're on Facebook, along with some of the greatest minds of the world, and that includes you. Visit us on Facebook at Voice America Empowerment.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Welcome back, folks, to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Jubi Arriola-Headley, who has recently come out with his second poem collection called Bound. And now he's going to read for us one that we mentioned a little earlier called Banjo. Take it away.
Banjo. It's commonly understood, though they may have the history, that the earliest of us to be grafted onto this stolen land carried not with us but our scars and our memories. Often, these were one and the same. But when they weren't, we remembered our memories and birthed spinning iterations of what had been back home into what was needed here. Context, as ever, was key. The banjo, for example, a great unto the Juneteenth power great grandchild of an instrument of exchange, born of independent minds in Senegambia and in the land of Wasulu music too, with cousins in Persia and China and Japan and Morocco, but none to speak of from the lands of the folks whose offspring stay trying to claim it nowadays as their own. It's a matter of conjecture whether they stole it from us because they understood its power or because they didn't. What we know, what is engraved upon our every bone, the exercise of pleasure as revolution, the incantatory vapors it raises, they steady us. We breathe deep for all those what couldn't.
Banjo.
Banjo.
Such a piece.
Thank you. I just wanted to write something about how I recognize that the banjo was born, that we created it, our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I think that can be the role of art, to sort of codify stories that would be lost otherwise. And I worry that 100 years from now, folks won't know that anymore. And I'm not a historian. Maybe I could become one, but I'm not today. But I can write a poem that captures some of that. So some of what I try to do sometimes is that project. Make sure our stories aren't lost.
Which is part of that aspect, not just of reclaiming our history, which gets very much into the Dinkra of the Sankofa about what we've remembered, but also what we're going to go forward with too.
Right. Very, very, very good point. You know, because it's not just history, it's living current experience. The banjo still exists. There are Black country artists and Black banjo players who within their field are renowned as we speak. So illuminating them to the world as well, illuminating not just the history of this instrument, but its present and its future. Because the banjo is not going anywhere either. It's going to be an important part of music going forward. So,
yeah. I have one of those albums, especially. It was Our Native Daughters, which is love listening to that album.
Right. Is that Rhiannon Giddens?
Yep.
Okay, good. I got it right. Yes, I just want to write this poem. I started in a place, and it was kind of with her, and then I went down other paths to find other artists. But in my research, I sort of fell in love with some music, and hers was some of it.
Mm-hmm. Quite a bit of those. Yeah.
Right.
So some of the other pieces in here too, before we get into our next one, I want you to read.
Right. Right.
The going back to what we've talked about with the idea that we're writing this more for Black and queer individuals. What
Right.
has it been like trying to market to that?
Oh, I am sure I should have what will sound like a professional answer. I don't, because I don't worry about marketing
Mm-hmm.
at all. I don't market directly to anybody. What I write because I want to talk to people. I want to have conversations with people like this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So after I write, I try to connect with folks on podcasts, and I try to read at bookstores, and I try to go to literature and writing and poetry festivals. But most of that is, in my mind, it's not to market the book. It's to have the one person who might like the poem show up, and then I can talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe because I approach it that way, marketing, if that's what it is a joy, because I don't worry about getting page inches anywhere or how much it sells. It's a poetry book. There isn't, or there are maybe 5 poetry books that sell the way commercial fiction judges a success. Most
Mm-hmm.
poetry books only sell a few hundred copies. So I start off knowing that sales are never going to be what drives the goal. Never going to be what drives a book of poems. And so I just try to take my poems and read them to folks and share them with folks, and maybe have conversations, not just about the poems, but like we're doing, about the themes and topics that they call to mind, and see where we go from there. It's just my way of connecting with the other like-minded souls in the world, Black and or queer and or kinky and or a few other things. I live for the conversations. I really, 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 really do. Because it's almost as fun as the writing of the poems, quite honestly.
Well,
So
and that's sometimes a subject matter that also comes up in its own way when working with clients, is the standpoint of how many people are focusing on the destination as opposed to recognizing the journey.
Right. Exactly.
And so much of what I'm also hearing you talk about is there's so much about where you're also enjoying the journey, and you're enjoying the journey with who you're talking with.
Right. I'm not sure what a poetry destination should be. So it's all about the journey to me. I used to have a big problem writing poetry where I needed to tie up the ending, but that is not the project of poetry at all, to give you a neat and tidy ending. I just need to let the poem end where the poem needs to end. And it's made it it's really enriched the way I write poetry, to know that my goal isn't to give you resolution. I'm not trying to give you resolution. I may be, if anything, trying to get you to reflect on a moment or an experience and see how that resonates for you or doesn't. So that's what I'm always trying to do. So those conversations are the parts that are exciting for me.
Beautiful. So why don't we go on to our next little poem, which for those of you who have seen this first movie, which I believe Dr. Mercedes and I did have a conversation on.
Right.
Let's go to Wakanda.
Right. And this poem is called Njidaka's Appeal, and I remember that scene in Black Panther where he walks in, and I think it's the white CIA agent who says it's Killmonger, and he turns and he says, "That's not my name." Because in that movie, they don't actually say his name. Again, I had to go do research to the original comic series to figure out what his real name was. And I just found that a fascinating concept. I mean, it's something we talk about in the Black community specifically all the time. You don't call somebody out their name. That means a very specific thing. That means a thing that could get your ass beat after school or on the corner. You do not call people out their name. And especially if you're a man calling a woman out their name. But either way, that's how I thought of it. And I thought also that there are ways in which, and this is what Hollywood needs to do sometimes, ways in which Njideka is the villain of the film story. But in terms of what a project of Black liberation might look like, he's not really a villain. He's really the person who cares about liberation in ways that other people were blind to. So I wanted to humanize him a bit and highlight his struggle, which is kind of the approach I took with this poem. So I'll read it, I guess, and share it with you. It's called Njideka's Appeal. Hey, Auntie, can you spare me a homeland? The one I left didn't gift me my mother's name. Every word I'm fighting for, my native tongue, my immortal. Hey, Auntie, let us carve me a tongue to lick these wounds scriptured on my skin. They sting, they linger, they read as abscess or absence. I never learned the difference. Hey, Auntie, maybe you could fix your face to love me. I know I spit chaos, but if you cut out my tongue, I will write you a psalm, a shadow, a love song. Hey, Auntie, why do men metaphor mothers into countries, into tongues? I wouldn't know. I've never had a country. I mean, a mother. I mean, a home. I mean, a tongue. Part of me wrote this poem from a very sassy place. And I very specifically started it in that sassy place and went through and if you read the poem in the book, you'll see it starts off with an exclamation point, hey, Auntie, and moves through a period and then ends up with a question. It's kind of Njideka humbling himself to maybe try to connect with family that, if you remember his role in the movie and you remember the role of his family, he was not welcome to be a part of, and that he was hidden from for decades, obviously. But that line in the movie where he shows up in Wakanda and turns to Angela Bassett's character and says, "Hey, Auntie," is to me one of the gayest things that has ever happened on screen. And I am just convinced there is somebody involved in Wakanda building of that movie that was like just the draggiest person in the history of like drag and balls and Vogue and the 90s and 80s before it. Because Hey Auntie is just the gayest line. And so I had to start there. But then it became a rumination or almost just a yearning, a request, not quite a begging, but him reaching to ask somebody to open themselves to the possibility that he might not be the villain they saw him as. And I don't know if they do. That's not the point of the poem. The point of the poem is to remind folks he is a human with some human yearnings. And that he is not, no matter how much you might want him to be, and no matter how much the movie at least might pay him to be, he is not the literal villain that you're used to trying to paint. So you got to think more expansively about who he is in that world or in the world.
Which is, and even if we're not looking at the idea of villain, it's like, what do we paint for ourselves as people living in this time, surviving in this world? needing the connection, not just with our own people, but with the world itself.
Right. I also think his story is a story of us in so many ways. I think to George Floyd, and I think to how frustrating it is as Black folks for us to have to hear things like what you're saying would be more compelling if they weren't rioting. It was, I believe, Martin Luther King who said the riot, and maybe it was somebody else, but there is that saying, the riot is the language of the unheard.
Mm-hmm.
People don't seem to get that, they understand their violence. They don't understand our violence that doesn't even approximate their violence. You get to host an insurrection in the nation's capital and literally threaten the lives of U.S. senators and congressmen. But we break it must be something about capitalism too. We break some dishes and steal some TVs, and somehow we are qualitatively worse. Because that's how we express our rage. It's just fascinating.
Oh yeah. Even I know there's one of those another examples of those things is the movie that's coming out later, I think this summer, Ungentlemanly Tactics, talking about the true stories of World War II and the fact that the British basically had to go and get the people who didn't function like them to protect their asses.
Right. Yeah.
And that notion of just, in some regards, what is that social notion of what we're supposed to be doing, what we're acting, doesn't always play itself out well, and doesn't lay itself out. That's sometimes even what comes up when we're sitting I'm sitting in therapy with people, in that standpoint of, is there an element there their Blackness is not sitting well with people? Is it their queerness that's not sitting well with people? Is it their neurodiversity that is also not sitting well with people?
Right. Yeah.
And how do we go through that exclamation to that period to that question?
Right. Exactly. Right. That is the question.
Mm-hmm. And equally, are we asking them or are we asking ourselves?
Right. And that's a yes, because both. As a poet, I don't know what I'm doing if I'm not interrogating myself first and foremost. There's something about authenticity that's nearly impossible if you're not asking yourself the hard questions first. And there's something about authenticity that, if it doesn't exist in a poem, makes that poem less than a poem. So if we're not willing to invest that poem with authenticity, which means if we're not willing to ask ourselves the hard questions, and this is probably true of more than poetry, it's probably true of all art. If that's not where art's coming from, then why are we doing it? What is the point? So, I think it's both places.
And can be said for therapy is that we are looking at our lives and examining them. And that does mean introspection, and introspection does require us not always to be trying to tout our horns at our own horn. It's maybe it's time to take these things out from under us so that we can really look at it. And not everybody's ready to do that. Not everyone feels comfortable. And some people are very much afraid to do that.
Afraid. I mean, I think about the fact it took me a long time to come to therapy because, and I think you've exactly outlined why, I was not ready to do the level of what is the point of therapy if we're not going to do introspection? If we recognize there's some issues we need to work through, if we recognize there's some traumas we experience and that we want to try to heal from, if we're not going to dig into them, how are we going to get to the other side? There's one of the lines in the poem called Once in this book, which has been said in a million ways by different people, but the only way out is through. You just gotta dig into that stuff and do the hard work of unpacking it, as they call it. That they call it baggage for a reason. You gotta unpack it. And just lay shit out and really reflect on what it has done to you or how you were complicit in maintaining X, Y, or Z. Therapy is hard. There are days I do not like it, but it has been helpful in many many ways. And one of the ways it's been helpful specifically with my writing is it reminds me how much I need to invest in doing that kind of introspection, not just for me as a human to be a better person and maybe friend and certainly husband, but as a poet, it helps me be a better poet too, I think. I really do. And I went to a writing residency about a year ago where we fell into a conversation about the fact that most of the writers who were there felt that their therapy helped them be better writers. So that's something they think about constantly. And I think most, if not all, of the people in that conversation, there were like 8 or 10 of us. Actually, one person was a therapist, actually. But the rest of us were pretty convinced that we needed to be engaged in therapy to do the kind of writing to the standard we wanted to do it. So, yeah.
And as a therapist, there's ways where doing poetry is part of how we help our clients and how we also unwind from sometimes the vicarious trauma that comes with working with people.
Right.
Which is one of those also realities of where we're seeing therapists burning out and leaving the field. And lessons for our field about how better we need to be able to take care of ourselves to be here to do that.
Right. So
I think there's a great place for us to be wrapping up. I have one poem that I've picked out that we're going to read, and we'll as our closing. Before we do that, where can people find you to find more of the book, or have those occasions for you guys to sit and have conversations with them?
Right. I have a website, and it's pretty easy. It's www.justjubi.com. And that's the word just followed by my name, Jubi, justjubi.com. And you can contact me through my website and learn more about where I'm going and what I'm doing and what I'm writing.
All righty. Beautiful. And so we'll close with Jack.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh?
Yes. Well, Jack was an exercise. One of the things, and I don't know how this relates to therapy. Maybe we'll get to this in the last minutes, or maybe you'll think about it and tell me later. But one of the things that sometimes helps poetry is the idea of constraint, putting limitations on how you read it and discuss it. So this is a rhyming sonnet that somehow just seemed to fit this particular story. So I don't think it would work as well if it didn't have the constraints of needing to be a sonnet with a certain amount of syllables per line, etc.
Gotcha. Well, from the mechanics side of it, but from the visuals, from the story that's told here, I think it's a very good one.
Oh, well, thank you. All right,
Jack.
Well, then I will read y'all Jack.
Please do, and read us out.
Okay. The summer I turned 11, they banished me to die with Granny. She, who'd lost 6 kids before Dad, was bent on saving or saging or scaring me square. So she summoned the Obeah man to read my cards for 2 bottles of Jack, a blunt, and $20 US. He drank the first bottle right then. His jaw got black, but that didn't slow his slick. The long con had bled Granny before, not with a knife, but with hope. I caught the Jack of Spades on the flop. For her, that was it. He'd blessed my life. Granny's thin lips turned, let go of that grim, but I know a hijack when I see him.
So let folks ponder on that and its message within. Until we can meet again for your next book.
Thank you. I will give you a ring when that comes out.
Oh, definitely. I'll be looking forward and happy to have another conversation with you if we don't see each other before then.
Right.
All righty, folks. Well, this has been Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. And this concludes our multiple episodes for February for Black History, Black Excellence, Black Pride Month. So please continue to celebrate being Black and queer, being Black and trans all year round, and let the banjos play.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.